Your life isn't falling apart. Nothing is obviously wrong. You wake up where you're supposed to wake up. You go where you're supposed to go. You do what your life requires you to do. And from the outside, it makes sense. People look at you and see stability. They see progress. They see someone who is doing well. You've built something, a routine, a structure, a path, and you followed it consistently, responsibly, carefully. But there are moments, quiet ones, easy to dismiss, when something feels off. Not painful, not dramatic, just unfamiliar. You move through your day completing everything you planned, but it doesn't feel like you're moving inside your own life. It feels like you're maintaining it, like you inherited it, like it was handed to you already in motion. You participate, you respond, you continue, but something deeper stays silent. You don't feel proud of it. You don't feel connected to it. You don't even feel resistant to it. You just feel distant, and that distance is hard to explain, because nothing is bad, nothing is broken, nothing is forcing you to escape, which creates a question you don't know how to answer. If your life isn't wrong, why doesn't it feel like yours? You try to ignore that question. You tell yourself this is normal. This is adulthood. This is what happens when life becomes real. You stop chasing feelings. You start building stability. And stability is supposed to feel safe. It's supposed to feel like arrival. But this doesn't feel like arrival. It feels like continuation. Like something kept going, and you never stopped it long enough to ask if it belonged to you. There was no single moment where you chose this life. No clear decision. No defining yes. It happened gradually. So gradually, you never stopped to question it. You followed what made sense at the time. What was expected? What was available? What was safe? One step led to another. One responsibility created the next. One version of you replaced the previous one. And each step felt reasonable, logical, acceptable. Until one day you looked around and realized you were standing inside a life you never consciously claimed. Not because you were forced, because you never paused long enough to choose differently. This is how it happens. Not through failure, through adaptation. You adapt to opportunities. You adapt to expectations. You adapt to who the world needs you to be. And adaptation is rewarded. People respect you for it. They trust you. They see you as someone who figured things out, someone who found their path. But what they don't see is the quiet distance between you and the person living that path. Because from the outside, it looks like ownership, but internally it feels like maintenance. You keep it running. You keep it stable. You keep it intact, but you don't feel rooted inside it. You don't feel like it came from you. You feel like it continued without asking you. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to separate yourself from it. Because your life becomes your identity, and your identity becomes something you no longer question. Until something small breaks the illusion. A moment of honesty. A moment where you stop performing long enough to notice something unsettling. You are not unhappy. You are not trapped. You are not lost. But you are not fully here either, which leaves you with a realization that feels both quiet and irreversible. You didn't choose this life. You adapted into it. At first, you don't question it. Why would you? Everything is working. You're moving forward. You're becoming someone. At least that's what it looks like. Your days have structure. Your decisions have logic. Your life has direction. And direction feels like certainty. Certainty feels like safety. So you keep going. You wake up and follow the pattern. You complete what's in front of you. You move toward what comes next. And each step reinforces the same assumption. This must be your life. Because you're living it. Because you're inside it. Because it belongs to you. But belonging is not the same as ownership. Belonging can happen by proximity. Ownership only happens by choice. And somewhere along the way, choice became automatic. You stopped asking yourself what you wanted. You started asking what made sense. What was realistic? What was responsible? What was expected? And expectations are powerful, not because they force you, because they guide you quietly. They shape your decisions without announcing themselves. They influence your direction without asking permission. You follow them because they feel normal. They feel reasonable. They feel safe. And safety is persuasive. Safety tells you not to risk losing what you've built. Safety tells you not to question what's already working. Safety tells you not to disrupt the version of yourself everyone recognizes. So you don't. You continue. You maintain. You reinforce until one day something shifts. Not externally, internally. You notice how detached you feel from your own progress. You accomplish something you work toward, and instead of pride, you feel neutrality. You reach a place you thought would feel meaningful, and instead of fulfillment, you feel distance. you realize something unsettling. Your life is moving, but you are not moving with it. You are accompanying it, like a passenger, not a driver. And that realization doesn't feel dramatic. It feels quiet, clear, undeniable. Because when something is truly yours, you feel connected to it. You feel present inside it. You feel involved in its creation. This feels different. This feels inherited. Not in the sense that someone forced it on you. In the sense that you accepted it before you understood it, before you examined it, before you asked if it reflected you. You built it piece by piece, but not from desire. From continuation of what made sense. Continuation of who you were becoming. Continuation of momentum. Momentum is powerful. Momentum doesn't ask questions. Momentum just moves. And once you're inside it, stopping feels dangerous. Stopping feels irresponsible. Stopping feels like losing everything you've already invested. So you don't stop. You don't question. You don't interrupt the pattern. You protect it. You defend it. You become loyal to it, even when it doesn't feel like yours. And loyalty creates identity. You start introducing yourself through it. You start defining yourself by it. You start believing this is who you are, not because you chose it, because you repeated it. Repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity creates acceptance. Acceptance creates permanence, until permanence becomes invisible. You stop seeing it as something you're doing. You see it as something you are. And that's when the distance deepens, because the person you are and the life you're living no longer feel like the same thing. You perform your role well. You meet expectations. You fulfill responsibilities. But internally, something stays disconnected. You feel like you're maintaining a character, not expressing yourself. And characters are convincing. Characters can function perfectly. Characters can succeed. Characters can build entire lives. But characters are not the same as you. Characters exist to operate. You exist to live. And living requires ownership. Ownership requires choice. Choice requires awareness. Awareness requires interruption. Interruption of automatic continuation. Interruption of inherited direction. Interruption of momentum. And interruption feels uncomfortable, because interruption forces you to face something you've avoided. The possibility that the life you built was never consciously yours. Not completely. Not intentionally. You adapted into it. You grew into it. You accepted it. But acceptance is not the same as authorship. Authorship requires you to see yourself inside what you're creating. Not just present. Not just functioning. Present with intention. Present with ownership. Present with alignment. And alignment is what's missing. Not success. Not stability. Alignment. The feeling that your life reflects you. Not just your circumstances. Not just your history. You. And when alignment is missing, everything else feels incomplete. Even when it works. Even when it looks right. Even when it makes sense. Because sense is not the same as truth. And truth is harder to ignore. Truth waits beneath routine. Truth waits beneath identity. Truth waits beneath continuation. Until one day you hear it. Not loudly. Clearly. This life is not bad. This life is not broken. This life is not wrong. But it is not fully yours. And that realization doesn't destroy your life. It exposes your absence inside it. It reveals the space where you were supposed to be. Not as the maintainer, not as the performer, not as the continuation, but as the author. And the question that follows is unavoidable. Not how did you get here, but when did you stop being the one who chose it? Because you can live inside a life for years and never truly enter it. You can build something completely and still not feel like it belongs to you. And the longer you stay inside it without ownership, the more invisible you become to yourself. Until one day you recognize the truth. You're not living a bad life. You are living an inherited one. Once you see it, you can't go back to not seeing it. Nothing changes on the outside. You still wake up at the same time. You still move through the same spaces. You still carry the same responsibilities. But internally, something has shifted. You begin to notice how much of your life runs without you. How many of your decisions were never really decisions. They were continuations. Continuations of who you had been. Continuations of what made sense. Continuations of what was already in motion. And continuation is quiet. It doesn't feel like surrender. It feels like responsibility. You tell yourself you're being practical. You tell yourself you're being mature. You tell yourself this is what stability looks like. But stability was never supposed to erase you. Stability was supposed to hold you, not replace you. And this is where the truth becomes difficult to avoid. You didn't consciously choose most of what defines your life. You accepted it step by step. You inherited roles. You inherited expectations. You inherited identities, not from one person, from everywhere, from family, from culture, from circumstance, from the version of yourself that existed before you understood yourself. And inheritance feels natural because it arrives early, before awareness, before authorship, before you know the difference between who you are and who you became. So you grow into it, you adapt to it, you become fluent in it, you learn how to perform it well, you learn how to succeed inside it. And success makes it harder to question, because success becomes evidence. Evidence that this must be right. Evidence that this must be yours. Evidence that this must be you. But success without ownership creates distance. Distance between the life that works and the self that lives it. You accomplish something meaningful, and it doesn't feel meaningful. You reach a place you work toward, and it doesn't feel like arrival. Because arrival only happens when you are present at the moment of creation, not when you inherit the result. And this is the moment most people avoid. The moment they realize they have been loyal to a life that never belonged to them. Not completely, not intentionally. They were loyal to the continuation, loyal to the identity, loyal to the structure, but not loyal to themselves. Because being loyal to yourself requires interruption. Interruption of what everyone recognizes. Interruption of what everyone expects. Interruption of what you've invested years becoming. An interruption feels like loss, even when it isn't. Because you don't just interrupt the life, you interrupt the person who lived it. You interrupt the version of yourself that learned how to survive inside it. And survival is persuasive. Survival tells you not to question stability. Survival tells you not to risk uncertainty. Survival tells you not to leave what is already working, even if what is working is not yours. And this is the cost of adaptation. Adaptation protects you from failure, but it also protects you from authorship, because authorship requires risk. Authorship requires uncertainty. Authorship requires you to face something most people spend their lives avoiding. The possibility that you are living a life designed by momentum, not by you. Momentum is powerful. Momentum can carry you for decades. Momentum can build entire identities. Momentum can create a version of you that everyone recognizes, except yourself. And the longer momentum carries you, the harder it becomes to imagine stopping. Because stopping would mean facing the distance, facing the silence, facing the absence of yourself inside everything you built. So most people don't stop. They continue. They maintain. They inherit. They live entire lives inside structures they never authored. Not because they were forced, because they never interrupted the continuation long enough to choose differently. And over time, continuation becomes identity. Identity becomes permanence. Permanence becomes invisible. Until one day, something inside you refuses to stay quiet. Not loudly, clearly. You begin to feel the absence, not as pain, as disconnection. Disconnection from your own direction. Disconnection from your own authorship. Disconnection from yourself. And disconnection creates a question you can no longer avoid. If you didn't consciously choose this life, why are you still living it? Not because it's bad, not because it's broken, because it isn't yours. And this is the midpoint most people never reach. The realization that changes everything without changing anything. You didn't lose your life, you inherited it. You didn't fail to find yourself. You adapted away from yourself. You didn't choose this identity, you continued it. And continuation is not the same as ownership. Ownership begins the moment continuation stops. Not externally, internally. The moment you see the truth clearly enough that you can no longer pretend you don't feel the distance. Because once you see that your life was inherited, you are faced with something both terrifying and freeing. For the first time, you realize you are not obligated to remain a continuation. You are allowed to become an author. The moment you realize you are allowed to become the author, something inside you resists. Not because it isn't true, because it is. Because if your life isn't truly yours, then neither is the person you became to live it. And that realization creates a quiet kind of fear. Not fear of losing everything, fear of seeing how much of it was never chosen. You begin to notice how deeply rooted your current life is in adaptation. How many of your preferences were shaped by what was available? How many of your goals were shaped by what was rewarded? How many of your decisions were shaped by who you needed to be to belong? Belonging is powerful. Belonging can convince you that something is yours, even when it isn't, because belonging feels like safety. And safety makes it easier not to question anything. But ownership feels different. Ownership feels active. Ownership feels intentional. Ownership feels like something you stand inside, not something you maintain from a distance. And the longer you live inside something you never fully chose, the more unfamiliar ownership begins to feel. You start to wonder if it's too late to interrupt the continuation, too late to reclaim something that has been on autopilot for so long, too late to separate yourself from the identity everyone knows you as. Because that identity works, it functions, it survives, it earns approval, and approval reinforces continuation. Approval makes it harder to stop, harder to admit that something essential has been missing. Not success, not stability. You begin to realize that your greatest fear isn't failure, it's freedom. Freedom means responsibility. Freedom means you can no longer blame momentum. You can no longer say this is just how things turned out. Freedom means your life becomes your authorship. And authorship removes the distance. Authorship requires you to stand inside your decisions while they are happening, not after, not in reflection. Now. And now is where most people hesitate, because now is uncertain. Momentum was certain. Momentum already knew where it was going. Momentum didn't need your permission. Authorship does. Authorship waits for you to step forward. Authorship waits for you to interrupt the pattern, not by destroying your life, by entering it fully, honestly, presently. And presence feels unfamiliar at first, because presence removes the protection of distance. Distance allowed you to live without confronting yourself. Presence makes that impossible. Presence forces you to see what is yours and what isn't, what reflects you and what reflects who you had to be. And that clarity can feel destabilizing, because it reveals how much of your life was built without you. Not maliciously, not intentionally, automatically, gradually, quietly, until the structure was complete. And you were standing inside it, wondering why it didn't feel like home. This is the cost of inherited momentum. It builds a life around you before you know how to build one for yourself. And most people stay there, not because they love it, because they don't realize they can leave internally. They continue performing the role, continue maintaining the structure, continue protecting the identity, even when it no longer reflects them. But once you see it clearly, something changes. You may still live in the same place. You may still carry the same responsibilities. You may still look the same to everyone else. But internally, the distance is no longer invisible. You feel it. And feeling it creates a choice. Not a dramatic choice, a quiet one. The choice to remain a continuation, or the choice to become an author. Not all at once, not perfectly, but deliberately. Because authorship doesn't begin when your life changes. It begins when your relationship to it does. When you stop assuming your life is something you were given and start recognizing it as something you are allowed to enter, something you are allowed to shape, something you are allowed to claim. Not later, not someday, now. Because the truth most people avoid is simple. A life can function perfectly and still be missing the person it belongs to. And the moment you stop continuing it automatically is the moment it finally has the chance to become yours. The shift doesn't happen all at once. You don't wake up this next day as a completely different person. Your life still looks the same routines, the same conversations, the same expectations waiting for you. But something inside you is no longer moving automatically. There is a pause where continuation used to be. A pause before you agree. A pause before you respond. A pause before you step back into the version of yourself everyone expects. And inside that pause, there is awareness. Awareness that you are here, not as the continuation, as the observer. And for the first time, you are not just watching your life. You are watching yourself inside it. You notice how often you almost disappear. How often you almost say yes without thinking. How often you almost become the person you were trained to be. Almost. But now the pattern isn't invisible. You see it forming. You see the momentum reaching for you. And seeing it changes your relationship to it. Momentum only controls you when it remains unconscious. Once you see it, you are no longer inside it. You are standing in front of it. And standing in front of it creates something unfamiliar. Choice. Not dramatic choice. Not life-altering choice. Moment-to-moment choice. Choice to remain present. Choice to notice what you feel before you silence it. Choice to recognize when you are about to abandon yourself to maintain continuity. Before you didn't know you were leaving. Now you feel it as it happens. You feel the moment you almost disconnect. The moment you almost perform. The moment you almost disappear. And sometimes you still do. Sometimes continuation still wins. Because continuation is practiced. It is familiar. It is efficient. It doesn't require effort. Authorship does. Authorship requires attention. Authorship requires honesty. Authorship requires you to remain in moments you used to escape, not because it's comfortable, because it's yours. You begin to notice something surprising. Nothing external needs to change for your life to begin feeling different. You don't need a new path. You don't need a new identity. You don't need a new destination. You need presence inside the one you already have, because ownership was never about where you are. It was about whether you were there when it was happening. You realize you spent years arriving somewhere without ever entering it. Now entering becomes the quiet act of staying. Staying in conversations instead of drifting away. Staying in your decisions instead of inheriting them. Staying in your moments instead of observing them. Staying inside yourself. And staying feels fragile at first, because you're not used to holding your life from the inside. You're used to maintaining it from a distance. Distance was efficient. Distance was safe. Distance allowed you to function without being affected. But distance also kept you absent. Now presence makes everything feel different. Not easier. Real. Real in a way that removes the numbness. Real in a way that makes you visible to yourself again. You begin to recognize something you didn't notice before. Your life was never empty. It was unattended. Not by others. By you. And unattended things continue without direction. They continue based on habit, based on repetition, based on inertia, until someone returns to them, until someone takes ownership, until someone becomes the author. That someone is not a future version of you. It is you, here, now, not when everything changes, when you stop leaving. Because your life doesn't become yours when the circumstances transform. It becomes yours when you do. Not externally, internally. When you stop inheriting your moments and start inhabiting them. Because inhabiting is what breaks continuation. Inhabiting is what interrupts momentum. Inhabiting is what brings you back into your own life. Not as the character, as the author. And authors do not wait for permission. They begin where they are, inside the life that was waiting for them to finally arrive. Nothing announces the moment your life becomes yours. There is no clear dividing line, no visible transformation, no external confirmation. From the outside, everything still looks the same. You still live in the same places. You still speak to the same people. You still carry the same responsibilities, but something fundamental is different. You are no longer absent. You are no longer continuing a life automatically. You are inside it, not as the person who inherited it, as the person who chose to enter it. And entering your life doesn't require destroying what already exists. It requires inhabiting it, fully, honestly, without disappearing from it. You begin to notice that nothing was ever missing. The structure was there. The path was there. The life was there. You weren't, not completely. You were protecting yourself. You were adapting. You were continuing. But now you are here, not perfectly, not permanently, but consciously. And consciousness changes everything. Because once you see that your life was never bad, only borrowed, you stop trying to escape it. You stop trying to replace it. You stop trying to find another one. You start stepping into the one that was already waiting for your presence, waiting for your authorship, waiting for you. Your life was never meant to be something you carry. It was meant to be something you live. And the moment you stop continuing it unconsciously is the moment it finally becomes yours.